A husband mocked his ex-wife at a reunion party. But then she made a phone call and suddenly... The email came on a quiet Wednesday morning, nestled between promotional ads and work updates. Hannah stared at it for a long time before opening it. The sender was a name she hadn't thought of in years, Gregory Hollingsworth, her ex-husband. The subject line read, "Annual Reunion Dinner, You're Invited." At first, she assumed it was a mistake. Why would he invite her to a formal event that included business owners, executives, and investors? But as she read further, it became clear. Gregory wanted to show off his company, his new wife, his version of success, and perhaps rub salt into an old wound. Hannah hadn't seen Gregory in 5 years, not since the divorce left her financially and emotionally shattered. They had met in college when she was shy and ambitious, and he was charming, clever, and full of promises. Their marriage, which started with shared dreams, ended with betrayal and a cold apartment she could no longer afford. Now, reading the invitation, her fingers trembled not from fear, but from something else, resolve. She had built herself back up from the ground. And though she had done it quietly, maybe it was time to stop hiding. At lunch with her friend Naomi, Hannah laid out the invitation like it was a bomb waiting to detonate. Naomi gasped. "He invited you? After everything?" Hannah nodded. "It feels like a setup." Naomi leaned forward. "Or maybe it's your stage. Look at you now, composed, thriving, in your own quiet way. If he wants a show, give him one." The thought lingered. A part of Hannah still remembered the humiliation, the sleepless nights, and the weight of judgment that followed her after Gregory left. She wasn't sure she wanted to be seen again, especially not through the lens of people who only knew her at her lowest. But Naomi had a point. Hannah had changed. Her days now were filled with meetings, strategy sessions, and numbers that few understood precisely how she liked it. Her success had been calculated, disciplined, and private. She didn't boast or seek validation. Still, a voice inside her whispered that perhaps it was time to let them see who she had become. So, with a deep breath, Hannah replied to the email, "Thank you for the invitation. I will attend." The boutique was quiet, with soft jazz playing and sunlight filtering through lace curtains. Hannah stood in front of the mirror as the stylist pinned the final adjustments to a navy satin gown. It hugged her frame perfectly, dignified but not loud. Her makeup was understated, enhancing her features with a gentle precision. Looking at her reflection, she hardly recognized the woman who once cried herself to sleep on a borrowed mattress. This woman was composed, understated, and graceful, powerful in the quietest ways. The transformation was more than physical. It was rooted in every night she had worked late, every rejection letter she turned into a lesson, every spreadsheet she mastered without help. She had grown far beyond the version of herself Gregory once mocked for wasting potential. She didn't need to say a word at the event. Her presence would be enough. Still, she prepared mentally for the looks, the whispers, and perhaps the inevitable confrontation. She wasn't there to prove anything, but she also wasn't there to apologize for surviving. The hotel ballroom was exactly what she expected, extravagant, filled with tailored suits and laughter that felt rehearsed. The room smelled of money, ego, and expensive perfume. Hannah walked in with poise, immediately drawing subtle glances. People didn't recognize her at first, but they sensed she didn't belong, or thought she didn't. Then someone gasped, and the whispers began. Gregory, standing near the bar with his arm around a tall, impeccably dressed woman, did a double take. His smile faltered. Clarissa, Gregory's new wife, turned as he mumbled something in her ear. She scanned Hannah from head to toe and then smirked. "That's her," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Hannah met her gaze without flinching. Gregory stepped forward, trying to mask his surprise. "Hannah, you actually came." She nodded calmly. "You invited me, didn't you?" His wife interjected, "We weren't sure if you'd show." "It's such a different world now." Hannah smiled. "Not as different as you might think." Over champagne and idle chatter, Hannah was seated at Gregory's table, an obvious setup. The guests were mostly investors, former colleagues, and Clarissa's friends. The small talk was layered with subtle jabs. Clarissa, resting her manicured hand on Gregory's shoulder, leaned in and said, "So, what do you do these days, Hannah? Still consulting, or something more humble?" Before Hannah could answer, Gregory chuckled. "She used to borrow money just to pay rent. Tough years." The table erupted in polite, awkward laughter. Hannah didn't blink. She took a slow sip of her wine, then set the glass down with precision. "Well, I suppose I've done a bit of everything. It's been an interesting journey." Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Hopefully not too hard. I remember you always had a bit of pride. Even when things were falling apart." The words hit the table like a dropped fork. But Hannah didn't respond in kind. She simply looked at him and said, "Yes, Gregory. And now I know exactly what I'm worth." As the main course arrived, Clarissa tilted her head, pretending to be curious. "Tell me, Hannah," she said, tapping her fork lightly against her plate, "do you work at a call center now or something?" Her voice was dipped in sarcasm, sweetened just enough to pass as casual. The table chuckled, though a few faces shifted uncomfortably. Gregory didn't stop her, he grinned, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Hannah simply dabbed her lips with her napkin and set it down calmly beside her plate. "No," she replied evenly, "I work in finance. Strategic equity and venture structuring." The room fell quiet for a second. Clarissa laughed awkwardly. "That sounds important." Gregory leaned back, raising his glass. "Let's just say, whatever she's doing, it's not Forbes material." More laughter followed. But Hannah didn't look at him. She didn't have to. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the presence of a familiar face across the hall, a man in a gray suit with salt and pepper hair. Mr. Reeve. Mr. Reeve was a well-known investor, someone whose opinion could shift markets. He was rarely seen at social events, which made his appearance all the more notable. Hannah recognized him instantly. He had once tried to buy into a fund she co-managed anonymously. At the time, he had been impressed by her sharp analysis and discretion. She had declined the meeting. Now, watching him glance toward her with mild curiosity, she wondered if he remembered her face. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply straightened her back and continued her meal. Strength wasn't loud, she had learned, it was quiet, composed, and unmistakable. The more Clarissa and Gregory tried to provoke her, the more she anchored herself in poise. She knew the timing wasn't right yet. They wanted her to react, to break, to remind the room why she had once been the object of pity. But tonight, she wasn't their pawn. She was the one holding the board. From across the ballroom, Mr. Reeve's gaze lingered. He leaned toward a younger associate beside him and whispered something. The young man looked over discreetly, then back at Reeve, nodding. Hannah noticed. Her mind started calculating. Did he recognize her? Did he connect her face to the woman behind Delwyn Capital, the anonymous firm that held sway over multiple tech companies, including one that Gregory's firm had recently courted for a merger? The realization settled in her stomach like a drop of ice water. Gregory didn't know. He had no idea who controlled the very firm he was begging to close a deal with. And Clarissa, dripping in diamonds but starved for grace, had no clue she was mocking the hand that fed their future. Hannah looked down at her plate, hiding a smile. Some debts didn't need collecting through words. Sometimes, silence was the sharpest blade of all. As dessert was served, Gregory raised his glass in a self-satisfied toast. To moving forward, he said, locking eyes with Hannah, and leaving behind the things that held us back. The words carried a weight that only she understood. The table raised their glasses obediently, some clearly unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Clarissa grinned smugly, resting her hand once more on Gregory's arm, like she had claimed some kind of prize. Hannah didn't toast. She let the silence between the clinking glasses highlight her refusal. Then she finally looked up and said, "I'm just waiting for a payment to clear from your firm. Should be any moment now." The words were soft, almost an afterthought, but they landed like thunder. Gregory blinked, confused. "What?" Hannah smiled. "Delwyn Capital. We own the controlling shares in Vance Systems. You're in talks with them, aren't you?" Gregory froze. So did the entire table. Gregory's phone buzzed loudly on the table. He glanced down and went pale. The screen read, "Transaction delayed. Contact Delwyn Capital for release confirmation." He looked back at Hannah, his face twisted in disbelief. You're with Delwyn?" She didn't answer directly. She reached for her wine glass, took a slow sip, and simply said, "It's a small world, Gregory. The circles you laugh at today may be the same ones you orbit tomorrow." Clarissa leaned over his shoulder, staring at the screen. "What does that mean?" she hissed. Gregory didn't respond. Around them, a hush had settled over the table. The laughter was gone. Hannah stood gracefully. "It's been a lovely evening. Thank you for the invitation." As she walked away, she passed Mr. Reeve, who nodded at her with a knowing smile. "Pleasure to finally meet the mind behind the curtain," he said. "Likewise," Hannah replied. And just like that, the tide began to turn. 5 years earlier, Hannah sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, surrounded by eviction notices and unopened bills. The heating had been shut off, and she was bundled in layers, clinging to a mug of instant coffee for warmth. Gregory had walked out with no explanation beyond, "You're just not enough for me anymore." He left her with nothing but shattered dreams and an overdraft bank account. The silence in the apartment was louder than any fight they ever had. At night, she'd stare at the ceiling, replaying every moment she trusted him, every compromise, every sacrifice. The world saw her as another failed wife, another burdened woman who couldn't keep a marriage. What they didn't see were the nights she supported his startup, the way she pawned her jewelry to keep the lights on when his company missed payroll. All that effort, erased by his need to feel successful with someone shinier and richer. Hannah applied for dozens of jobs, anything that would bring in money. Eventually, she found a night cleaning position at a downtown office tower. It was hard, physical work, far from the consulting role she once held. But she accepted it without pride. The mop became her new routine, the smell of disinfectant, her new perfume. Sometimes, she scrubbed the marble floors of the very buildings where Gregory used to bring her for business dinners. She felt invisible. Executives passed by her in the early mornings as if she were part of the wall. Still, she showed up. She cleaned every surface with care. She reminded herself this wasn't her final stop, it was just a platform. After work, she'd go home and open a dusty laptop to study free finance courses. If life had taken everything, she would rebuild from knowledge. She would make herself unshakable. It was during one of those long nights that she met Mrs. Dawson, the quiet accountant who always worked late on the 14th floor. Unlike the others, Mrs. Dawson greeted Hannah with a smile and often left her a cup of tea with a sticky note, "Warm yourself before you clean." One evening, seeing Hannah scribbling figures in a notebook during her break, Mrs. Dawson sat beside her. "You have a brain for numbers," she said. "Ever thought about private equity?" That night, they talked for hours. Mrs. Dawson became more than just a kind coworker, she became a mentor. She loaned Hannah books on investment theory, shared insights from decades in the field, and introduced her to the idea of silent capital, money that moved quietly, but with great force. "The most powerful people aren't the loudest," she'd say. "They're the ones writing the contracts." Hannah listened. She absorbed everything. Months passed. With discipline and Mrs. Dawson's guidance, Hannah began trading with a tiny inheritance from her late aunt, a few $1,000s. She researched obsessively, learned to read between the lines of corporate reports, and slowly, carefully, made her first trade. It wasn't glamorous, a quiet investment in a logistics firm no one cared about. But 3 months later, it tripled. Her hands trembled when she checked the balance. It wasn't the amount, it was the proof that she could do this. Each trade afterward was measured. She reinvested every cent, sacrificing luxuries for long-term growth. She lived below her means, avoided attention, and quietly opened an LLC, Delwyn Capital. She used proxies, a silent trustee, and a network of legal structures that made her invisible to the public eye. Her name never appeared. She wasn't building for fame. She was building an empire rooted in self-worth. Her days blurred into routines, cleaning floors by night, researching stocks by dawn, meeting with potential partners by afternoon. Sleep was a luxury. She survived on coffee, adrenaline, and a stubborn belief that she was meant for more. Every time exhaustion tempted her to quit, she'd remember Gregory's voice, "You just don't have what it takes." That sentence became fuel. Not for revenge, but for transformation. In time, Delwyn Capital began to attract attention. Clients spoke of its precision, its keen foresight, and the anonymity it provided. Investors liked mystery, especially when it yielded results. Hannah, still hidden behind layers of corporate veils, watched it all grow from her small apartment. She never once flaunted her success. She had learned that real power didn't need validation. It only needed focus. The woman scrubbing floors was now a woman who owned them. The turning point came when Delwyn Capital quietly invested in an underdog biotech company. At first, analysts dismissed it, citing unstable leadership and low market presence. But Hannah saw potential in its data pipeline, something others had overlooked. She moved quickly, investing just before the company secured FDA approval for a groundbreaking therapy. Overnight, its stock soared, and Delwyn's value doubled. This time, she didn't tremble. She had expected this outcome. Word of Delwyn's rise began to spread in private circles. Large firms grew curious. Hannah remained behind the curtain, choosing discretion over recognition. She hired a small, tight-knit team of remote analysts and legal advisors, all sworn to confidentiality. Her leadership was ghost-like, present in decisions, absent in ego. Her fund's success spoke louder than any profile or article. The name Delwyn soon carried the weight of respect in boardrooms across the country. As her portfolio expanded, so did the complexity of her decisions. Hannah found herself influencing tech mergers, green energy startups, and legacy manufacturing turnarounds. Still, she stayed beneath the radar, never attaching her personal name to any deal. Her preference for anonymity wasn't fear, it was strategy. Delwyn Capital became a trusted, mysterious player. Many assumed the firm was led by a group of veterans or international investors. No one guessed the truth. Ironically, one of the companies now courting Delwyn for investment was Hollingsworth Innovations, Gregory's pride. His firm was bleeding cash, quietly desperate for support. When her analysts brought the proposal to her, she stared at the file for a long moment. She didn't laugh or scoff. She just said, "We'll take majority interest. But stay quiet. Let him believe the deal is still alive." It wasn't revenge. It was structure, logic, and timing. Back at the reunion, Mr. Reeve couldn't shake the feeling that he knew Hannah from somewhere beyond that evening. After the event, he walked outside to the valet area, scrolling through his emails. One message stood out, a quarterly report from Delwyn Capital with a name in the administrative trail, H. Lynn Scott. He looked back toward the ballroom, where Hannah had just exited, and something clicked. Lynn Scott. Hannah. Delwyn. He quickly called his assistant. "Cross-check a name, Hannah Lynn Scott. I want to know her affiliations," discreetly. As the line went quiet, Reeve exhaled slowly. If his suspicion was right, then the woman who had been mocked all night by Gregory was not just connected to Delwyn, she was its architect. And if that was true, everything about the evening had just shifted. He smiled slightly. "Interesting," he muttered to himself, "very interesting." Inside the ballroom, Clarissa watched Gregory fumble with his phone, his expression now one of panic. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "What's going on? What's Delwyn?" Gregory didn't answer. His hands trembled slightly as he refreshed his inbox. Another email arrived, confirmation that the Delwyn funding had been suspended pending internal review. His mouth went dry. "We needed that deal," he whispered. "Without it, the merger stalls." Clarissa's face twisted with confusion and irritation. "Are you telling me she owns that company? That woman you used to live within that ratty apartment?" Gregory didn't reply. Clarissa's voice rose. "You said she was a failure. That she couldn't handle pressure. You laughed at her." Gregory's eyes were fixed on the phone screen, now blank. "She never needed to handle pressure," he murmured. "She became it." Just as Gregory stood to leave, a waiter approached him with a small envelope. "This was left for you, sir." Inside was a single card. White, thick, embossed with one phrase, "You never understood the value of what you discarded," no name, no signature. But Gregory knew. The weight of the message settled like stone in his chest. The woman he had belittled had built something far beyond his reach, and she had done it without ever raising her voice. Across the room, Mr. Reeve stepped out into the cool night air and dialed a number. "Hannah Lynn Scott, please. Tell her it's Richard Reeve. I'd like to speak directly. And no, this isn't about business. I just want to thank her. That dinner was educational." He ended the call and looked back at the glowing hotel windows. Somewhere in that building, a man who once thought he'd won was learning that real power doesn't need to announce itself. As word of the halted deal spread, the energy in the ballroom changed. Conversations quieted. Guests who had once laughed at Hannah's expense now exchanged uncertain glances. A few leaned in to whisper, connecting dots they hadn't seen before. Delwyn Capital. Control over the merger. Gregory's frozen expression. The once proud man now looked hollow under the chandelier's golden light. Clarissa excused herself, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Behind her, hushed voices grew louder. Hannah's name was on everyone's lips, spoken with a mix of surprise, disbelief, and a trace of admiration. Gregory remained at the table, staring blankly. His carefully curated image had cracked, and there was no performance left to uphold. The room that once fed his ego now mirrored his quiet humiliation. The following morning, the financial news spread like wildfire. Delwyn Capital suspends support to Hollingsworth Innovations flashed across every major business outlet. Investors pulled out. Stock prices dipped sharply. Gregory's board of directors demanded an emergency meeting. He sat silently at the head of the table as his CFO spoke of insolvency risks and breach of trust. The people who once praised him now looked for an exit. Gregory had built a company on borrowed confidence, fueled by his charm and superficial connections. Without Delwyn's funding, the merger deal was effectively dead. What stung more than the financial blow was knowing that the power behind it came from someone he had written off as weak. Hannah hadn't just survived. She had built something capable of sinking his empire with a single email. A week later, Gregory requested to meet Hannah privately. She agreed to a brief meeting at a quiet hotel cafe, not out of curiosity, but closure. He arrived late, wearing a suit that looked less tailored than usual. His eyes were tired. "Hannah," he began, his voice slower than she remembered, "I owe you an apology." She raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Back then, I didn't see what you were capable of. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just understanding." Hannah stirred her coffee calmly. "You didn't just leave me, Gregory. You erased me. You laughed when I struggled. And now, you expect a conversation to wash that away?" He looked down. I was wrong." She nodded. "Yes. You were. And that mistake cost you something far greater than pride." Her voice remained steady. "You never had to destroy me. But you tried. And I didn't return the favor, I just moved on, higher." That night, Gregory returned home to a silent house. Clarissa had left earlier that day, taking her jewelry, her designer clothes, and her bitterness with her. A note remained on the kitchen counter, "You lied to me about everything, including her." He stood there, surrounded by the echo of his choices. The mirror in the hallway reflected a man stripped of pretense. His empire had been built on arrogance and collapsed under the weight of a truth he had refused to see. Meanwhile, in a modest office overlooking the city, Hannah reviewed proposals from 2 venture firms seeking partnerships. Her assistant brought her a cup of tea. Outside, the world buzzed as usual. But inside, she felt a quiet peace. She wasn't chasing anything now, not revenge, not approval. What she had was enough. And more importantly, she had become enough for herself. Days later, Mr. Reeve requested a formal meeting. This time, it wasn't about introductions or politeness. He arrived with a proposal in hand, a seat on his global advisory board. "What you've built is exceptional," he said. But what's more remarkable is how you built it, in silence, in discipline, without spectacle. Hannah listened, thoughtful. She didn't need validation, but she respected Reeves' insight. He saw value, not just headlines. "I'm not interested in fame or exposure," she replied. "Then don't seek it," Reeves said. "But use your influence. The world needs more minds like yours in rooms where decisions are made." Hannah nodded slowly. She wasn't sure what her answer would be yet, but she knew this: she had earned every chair she was now being offered. Not because of luck, but because she refused to stay small when the world told her to shrink. Gregory drafted several emails over the next few days, trying to find the right words. None of them were sent. Each time he read them over, he realized they weren't apologies, they were excuses. And deep down, he knew Hannah didn't need them. She hadn't won by revenge. She had risen by letting go. That was the part he couldn't understand, how she moved on without seeking to destroy him in return. He stared at her last words in the cafe, replaying her tone, not bitter, not angry, just certain. That certainty haunted him more than any failure. He had spent years chasing validation through status, while she had cultivated value in silence. For the first time in his life, he had nothing left to offer, no leverage, no charm, no future to promise. Only regret. But Hannah didn't need to hear it. She had closed that chapter long ago. Clarissa didn't cry when she left. She didn't make a scene. She simply packed her things, called her lawyer, and exited the marriage with the same cold efficiency she once used to belittle Hannah. What stung Gregory most was her final line: "You built a house of mirrors and expected it to last. But the first real woman you underestimated shattered everything." Their relationship had been transactional from the beginning, two people obsessed with appearances. Without the illusion of success, their bond had no foundation. As she walked out, Gregory watched in silence, knowing that nothing he said would stop her. The woman he married to feel powerful had now seen the weakness behind his curtain. And she didn't respect what she saw. Hannah declined the board seat at first. Not because she wasn't honored, but because she needed time to think. She didn't want her future dictated by admiration or guilt. Instead, she took a few weeks off, traveling quietly to a small coastal town she used to dream about when life felt impossible. There, she walked along the shore, disconnected from deals, headlines, and performance metrics. She realized she wasn't running from her past anymore. She was walking towards something new, on her own terms. Sitting on the porch of a quiet inn, with the wind brushing against her face, Hannah finally felt still. She wasn't the woman who needed to prove anything. She was the woman who had. And from here forward, every decision would be rooted in peace, not pain. On a quiet morning, Hannah sat at a cafe with her usual tea, flipping through the business section of the paper. A bold headline caught her eye: "Gregory Hollingsworth steps down amid financial collapse." The article detailed the company's plummet, the failed merger, and internal conflict. No mention of Delwyn. No mention of her. She folded the paper gently and set it aside, unmoved. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was closure. The world had a way of correcting itself, not always with justice, but often with truth. Gregory's downfall hadn't come from sabotage. It came from arrogance. And her rise hadn't come from revenge, it came from quiet, relentless effort. That was the real difference between them. And it had always been. Later that week, Hannah visited a quiet cemetery outside the city. There, beneath a tree with golden leaves, rested Mrs. Dawson. She knelt beside the grave, her fingers brushing the carved stone. "You believed in me before I did," she whispered. "And I hope I've made you proud." She stayed there for a while, in silence, feeling both gratitude and grief intertwine. As she stood to leave, a breeze lifted the edge of her coat, and the world felt full again. Hannah didn't need revenge, applause, or recognition. She had built something no one could ever take: dignity, wisdom, and self-worth. She walked away from the grave with her head held high. Not because the world had changed, but because she had. And that made all the difference.